President Trump is praising his most recent and historic meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. On Sunday, he became the first sitting U.S. president to cross into North Korea. The country's state-run media called the event amazing, and the president tweeted that it was, quote, great to meet with Kim. But today there remain questions about whether the meeting did anything to move the needle on stalled nuclear negotiations. You'll recall the president's second summit with Kim in Vietnam earlier this year failed to produce any results in getting the North to give up its nuclear weapons program. Prior to that meeting, Mr. Trump met with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan. The two agreed to restart trade talks and agreed to hold off on issuing additional sanctions. But today, Chinese state media warned the road to a deal will be long and challenging. And CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid, who has returned to the White House after picking up a couple miles there, traveling with the president overseas. Paula, always great to see you. Let's begin with this issue of trade. The markets are reacting somewhat favorably to this truce, but what exactly was agreed to?
Errol, while we were there at the G20, there was no expectation that these two leaders would be able to hammer out a complete trade deal on the sidelines of the G20. The best case scenario was that the two men could agree to continue negotiations after they had really stalled over the past few months and at least agree to no more tariffs. And it appears those two goals, that best hope, that was realized. The president said that the two sides had agreed to keep the current tariffs in place, the ones that have already been imposed, but that the U.S. would not be following through on its threat to add additional tariffs. Now, another concession the U.S. made that has been somewhat controversial is the president also agreed to ease restrictions on the telecom giant Huawei. This company has been accused of conducting surveillance on the U.S. and against other countries. But here the president has eased restrictions on U.S. companies selling technology to Huawei. But overall, right now, the market seems pretty pleased with this agreement to continue negotiating. Shares in tech companies and chip makers, anyone with broad exposure in China, seems pretty happy.
And that Huawei development seems at least to be something President Xi Jinping was pushing for. Meanwhile, you have some Republican lawmakers in states impacted by the trade war worried that their constituents will continue to feel the brunt of tariffs, particularly when it comes to farmers. And they're concerned that could have an impact on President Trump's re-election chances in 2020. Do you get a sense that frustration around how these tariffs may impact farmers in Republican districts is fully understood there at the White House?
That's a great question, Errol, because all of this market reaction, this assumes that eventually there will be a good deal. But what was negotiated in Osaka, it really does give China more time in these negotiations, more time to lessen its dependence on the U.S. And the more time passes, the greater extent to which China is able to reduce some of its dependence on the U.S. That makes it less likely that they're going to give in to some of the more aggressive demands from the Trump White House. So as we get closer and closer to the election, that could put the White House in a tough spot. The president would be faced with having to either just agree to a lesser deal, a not great trade deal, or go into the general election with no trade deal. And as someone who really sold himself as the great negotiator, the great deal maker for something like this, especially something that has such a significant impact on the economy, to try to sell himself to voters with a not great deal or no deal, not an ideal situation for the White House and one they are trying to avoid. But here they've given China an advantage.
And President Trump, at the very least, wants to make things look like an agreement or a deal is being made. I want to turn now to that historic meeting over the weekend with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un. How exactly did all of that unfold? Because we understand it was a bit, slapped together relatively quickly, and you have folks like the new press secretary getting bruised up in the effort to coordinate all of this. How did this come together?
Well, Errol, publicly, we saw the president tweet on Saturday an invitation to Kim Jong Un to meet him at the border between North and South Korea to say hello and have a handshake. The president said that it was something he had just thought of that morning, but it's highly improbable, of course, that these two world leaders would slap together something in this way. In fact, he had actually told another Washington-based publication several days, almost a week prior, that this was something he was considering. But they did meet at the border. They exchanged that handshake. President Trump stepped over the border, Errol, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to enter North Korea. And then both men came back across the border, and they met with South Korean leader Moon Jae-in for about an hour, where the two men had extensive discussions. And the president says that the two sides, North Korea and the U.S., have agreed to continue their stalled negotiations over North Korea's nuclear program.
And is the continuing of talks the result, the tangible result that President Trump got after doing this? Is that really the only difference between what was available last week and what effectively the White House can do now?
Well, it depends who you ask. A lot of this does appear to be spectacle over substance, Errol. But the president is trying to sell this idea, both when he was in South Korea and also when he was in Osaka for the G20, that his great strength is relationships. He told us repeatedly during a press conference that he gets along with everyone, and that is important. And he believes that the most important thing for him is to develop and maintain and foster a relationship with the North Korean dictator. He believes that is his greatest chance for success in these nuclear negotiations. But there are other people who are concerned that he is putting too much on North Korea, that he is giving them too much legitimacy by going about things this way that they do not deserve. So it remains to be seen after one photo, the first summit, which is essentially a photo op where nothing was really agreed to, and then the second summit with North Korea that was effectively a failure in Hanoi. The talks fell through. This third event appears to have mostly been a photo op. They've agreed to continue conversations, and it remains to be seen if the president's strategy here to develop and foster this relationship is ultimately successful with his goal to denuclearize North Korea.
All right, Paula Reid joining us at the White House today. Thank you so much.